So before we jump into this one, we've got another poll. So if we could get that poll running here. And the context here is, what's the biggest impediment, at least within your organization or your experience, to implementing SOAR? So I know we've highlighted a few things, at least from an OT standpoint, that make it hard. Certainly those can become impediments, but there's other concerns, and we'll kind of see what the audience says here. So this is good. So we've got a much closer running here, so that's good. A couple things to talk about. We'll just give it another minute. Okay, looks like we've got the poll in. So this was somewhat surprising. I didn't know. I thought we'd be more in the visibility aspect as the front runner, but it actually is a limited budget and experience. That was kind of the front running answer. And then from there it becomes, we still have the IT/OT silo and divide. And then from there it was data collection and visibility, and then lastly, safety concern. And that is a real concern. So understanding and knowing those endpoints certainly makes some of the safety bits, kind of boost some confidence there. Doing an automated process to an HMI versus a historian versus a PLC, each one of those has their own risk tolerance and is responsible for different things. And that's kind of what you start to work out when you kind of put your SOAR plan together. So how can we make this work with all the classical challenges of OT that most practitioners come to love and enjoy? So really, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, so I'll say the thing that surprised me is I expected safety to be much higher on that, which is typically kind of the routine response to that. And then, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of this. What are some of the things that can really you can do to enable SOAR? So there's kind of one part that's about, okay, how do I make this happen? And then there's another part of what that might look like. So what's the result? And then at the end, we'll kind of give you a little bit around what are some best practices? How do I need to think about this problem? Because I think there's a lot of ideas out there about what SOAR is and what it's going to accomplish, and there needs to be very much a kind of a let's focus on really where's the value, at least currently. Obviously that can evolve. So we talked about the data collection and visibility. That's a big piece where you see some of this, for example, Pete mentioned in the utilities where they're gathering information about assets and things like that automated. If you're going to use SOAR, you have to have up-to-date information. You have to understand what's happening in the environment right now. And so if you don't have that, if you're manually, going back and pulling, importing spreadsheets or other items, information from emails, it becomes much more difficult to actually use SOAR, because SOAR is very much about incidents or things that are going on in your environment and reacting to those. We've talked a lot about having context around the data. So the way you respond to an incident on a SCADA server is different than a historian, is different than an engineering workstation, is different even from a workstation in a different location. So at a generation site versus a transmission site or a substation, all very different. And so that context becomes vital. The other part where that's really valuable is understand what your process is going to look like. So, you may get to some facilities where you have this SOAR piece and you're automating part of the process, but you can't automate the rest. You have to go contact someone, they have to handle it, you handle overlook operations. In some cases, it may be, no, this is a less critical site, we can go ahead and take this kind of action after, doing some due diligence. And so having that context about where things are, their location, what they are, where do they sit in the Purdue model, all that becomes really valuable in a SOAR platform, because you really have to understand that how I respond may be very different based on the context. You also have to understand this part about process resilience. So part of this goes into how much can you really automate? So can I actually make changes on an end device? Okay, could that possibly understand or impact operations? So you kind of have to have also that understanding of, okay, what's really the implication of automation? How resilient is this process? Am I really going to break something? And really, what's the risk? So if the risk is extremely high that let's say maybe you could shut down operations, so it's not even safety, but you shut down operations, that's probably not the best area to start with in terms of enabling SOAR. You want to focus on different areas. And then there's a whole patience aspect. There's no magic bullet. There's no, hey, drop this box into my environment and SOAR will be magic and everything will be done for me. Anyone from an OT background understands that there's a lot of testing and there's a lot of things that need to go on before you do certain things. So a lot of times where we see SOAR, they're going to start on either on a development system, a backup system, and they may only automate to a certain point. And once they're sure that works and it adds value, okay, let's see if maybe we can do another one, or maybe we can do it on a backup system on the production system. So you just got to be patient. There's no magic bullet. It'd be great if I said that I had this technology that would solve all your problems. You just drop it in. But the truth is, especially with SOAR and OT environments, there's no magic bullet. And so just being patient in that implementation process is a big part of it. Go ahead and next slide. So this is a view of what a sock-enriched asset data could look like. So there's a couple key things that I want to point out here that can make a huge difference. So at the top, for example, you're able to look at things at a facility or site level. You may have different managers, different response teams, all that can change. You may care about different things at different sites. And so having some of that information like, what facility is this at? But then also, if you look at other areas, understanding what kind of asset it is. For example, there's one near the bottom. This is from the second one where it talks about remote access to an HMI. Again, response may be different. That's coming from like a jump server to an HMI, okay? How I respond is going to change. Also things, understanding, again, where are they sitting in the Purdue model? Is this at my local operation site? Is this at my, my large SCADA level? So kind of understanding all that asset context, as we mentioned, really helps you understand how you might respond. And so it's important that on the OT side, you have all that because there is such an asset-centric view of it because of, this is stuff that can affect real people's lives or can affect, revenue for your company. And so you need to have that context. So go to the next slide. And so we'll just highlight some of kind of the information you might want to know. So this might be what a particular asset looks like. So you want to know information about that asset, things like MAC addresses, IPs, the site, who owns it, who's the business owner. That's another one that can dramatically affect how you're going to respond to an incident. Oh, this, even if it's something as simple as my process is going to gather up some information, my SOAR product will gather up information and it's going to create a ticket. Well, who that ticket goes to very much could depend on who's the business owner. Who do I need to consult with? Who do I need to contact to get any information I might need that I don't have already? And so having all of that, as well as sometimes being able to categorize or understand, what is this actual physical piece of equipment? How is it classified in the case of NARCSIP, for instance? What kind of items? Obviously, you can have things like latitude and longitude, location information, like what production, where is this on the production line? So all that, again, just enables people to make a better decision, because that's because of such the impact on, the real world. you need to make sure that you're safe, you're careful as you do things. And so this just kind of adds additional context in how you might respond to things, but also how it integrates with your SOAR process as well. So go to next slide. And this one, we actually have another poll here. So we have one last poll. So let's, if we can launch that poll. So this is, do you have an incident response process? So kind of helping us judge our audience here a little bit. Still got some results coming in. Pretty good, quite a bit of diversity, at least at first. It's changing now. We'll go just a little bit longer. There we go. Oh. So let's talk about this. So I think first thing I'll say is I think this would have been very different if we would have asked the same question probably a few years ago. Even I think we would have had a much higher ad hoc. I think it probably would have been mostly ad hoc unless you happen to be under regulation. But not really surprising that we've got quite a few people who are still doing ad hoc. But it is good to see that, hey, we've got people, more than half that have some kind of implementation of a plan. It may be well-defined or it may be full, but it's good to see that, the majority actually have some kind of plan. And so I'll talk a little bit about a couple key pieces of a solution. So I think we've got to bring up, I'm seeing the quick poll. I think we've got to bring up, Pete, the slides. So I'm going to talk about a couple parts. I'm going to use terminology I use, but there's different terminology that might be different between various plans. And so, Pete, we're still seeing the quick poll.
Yeah, I have it. I believe I have it shared.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do it. Stop and start one more time just to be safe here.
There we go. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to use some terminology, but I'll explain it also generically. So I call them workbooks. You can call them whatever you want, but essentially it's a workflow. It's when I have, in this case, an account compromise, what are the things I need to do? What kind of detection or analysis do I need to do up front? What kind of, containment, eradication, recovery, what is really possible? Now, the reason this is important is typically when we're working with OT teams, this isn't always real well defined. I think that the poll kind of showed that there's a lot of ad hoc processes. So SOAR, you want to have, one of the key elements is you do want to have some component of how you would respond. So typically that's done through workflows, workbooks, whatever you want to call them, but they're essentially a template of response. Now there's a lot out there in various products that will provide kind of templates, but the truth is this changes for every organization. How a pipeline company responds to it will vary between pipeline companies, between utilities, all that's going to vary, but having a template at least allows you to have this consistent process. And so part of your SOAR is you need to really think about what is really the process. And you can leverage, you might go look at NIST, or you might look at MITRE ICS or MITRE ATT&CK. You need to have this concept of when I have an incident that I need to investigate, what process should I follow? I see this especially important as we see more and more organizations looking at converged IT OT SOCs. Obviously you want to train your people adequately, but the workflow at least helps them, guide them in the process. And so having a workflow of some kind, either understanding what the process is, can really enable the SOAR use case, because now you suddenly have a flow to follow that you can do specific things. So if you go to the next slide, the second part of this is a work, I'll call it a workbook, a playbook, whatever. But this is things you can do to make the analyst's job easier. So like at the beginning of this one, this is kind of a flow. It may be as simple as go and tell me everything you know about the asset. And the thing to understand is that may not always be available in one platform. You might have to go query your endpoint protection. You might have to go query Enterprise or Industrial Defender. You might have to go query Splunk. Wherever it resides, you have a certain part of what are called playbooks, which essentially are automations. So they might be gathering up information. They can also be taking action. So they can be, I'm going to go out and block a firewall port. I'm going to disable an account. All those things are examples of playbooks. I will tell you, working with customers, there's a lot of playbooks that it would be great to have a platform that has some kind of almost like a function, like, you know what, on a lot of my playbooks, maybe I need to go out to Active Directory and get some information. You shouldn't have to write that for every playbook or investigation. So I would look for things that allow you to kind of reuse code or solutions that you've already come up with. And again, there's kind of these two aspects. There's playbooks that may go gather information, and then there's playbooks that take actions, create a ticket, go acknowledge an alert, go block a firewall port. All those things are examples of kind of more action oriented. And so if you go to the next slide, I'll give you just some best practices. And this is based on us working with customers and then talking to customers about SOAR in general. So one of the most basic things that it's really important to understand is, what is the value of SOAR? Moving past all the marketing, moving past SOAR and AI and all these things are going to change your life. I'll talk about typically where most people are right now with SOAR. And one of the first things that they use SOAR for is really freeing up time for more important tasks. So rather than having an analyst, when he gets a security incident, go and create a ticket, let's automate that. Let's save him 5 minutes. Let's go and gather all the information, throw it all in the ticket. Maybe he has to go to, do 30 minutes of gathering up information just to put in the ticket. So you definitely want to think about, typically how it's used is those tasks that don't really require a human are routine, and I'll talk about some of the rules of the road later. Let's use SOAR for those kinds of things at first. Doesn't mean you can't do the more advanced things. It's just where you probably are going to start of, let's free up time. Let's gather up that context information. Let's create the ticket. Let's, go and check a different tool. Let's do that all for the analyst so they don't have to. And it's a routine process. The other thing is understanding what's your goal. And I'll tell you, your goal at the start may change at the end. So for example, are you doing partial or full automation? So let me explain what that is for me, at least in this context. Partial is, I have a security incident come in, I'm gonna go gather information, I'm gonna do some checks, I'm gonna do some minor things, and then I'm gonna have a person will analyze that. And from that point, they're gonna go contact local operations, they're not gonna actually change anything, but they're gonna give this information so they know who to contact and how to coordinate the effort, okay? That's valuable, that's where most people start. They start with this, you know what, I wanna make the analyst's job easier, keep him from jumping between solutions, let's have it all in one place so I can respond, let's follow this template. Full automation, and I wanna caveat this, full automation does not mean no human in the loop. We know for OT environments, there's probably always going to be human in the loop. It's about, once a human is in the loop and they have said, this is safe, this is, go ahead, press go, whatever they do, you automate the rest. So for example, an incident may come to a person of something risky on the firewall. In a partial automation, they would do the investigation and then they would maybe contact the firewall team and understand, get more information, but they wouldn't automate that last piece. The full automation piece would come, okay, I've reviewed this, I know it's safe, it's not going to impact operations, I now press the go button and it's going to go create a firewall rule or block a port or things like that. So understanding where you want to get to ultimately. So if you do want to get to full automation, what does that look like? Is that a 6 months process? Is that a year process? Kind of understanding that. And again, understanding that neither of these exclude a human making decisions or multiple humans, but just understanding what's my goal, what's my objective. If you are kind of, as we had in the survey, the poll, if you're doing it all ad hoc, I would look to frameworks out there. So the reason you want to look to frameworks, there's pros and cons for every framework, is that gets you started. It's going to make it much easier to get more advanced in your incident response process. So I would, if you don't have any defined processes and things like that, look to see if there's frameworks out there that can help you get there faster. The last thing I'm going to talk about is what are kind of the rules of the road. And by this, I mean, when you're looking at SOAR, what should you be looking for in terms of the automation? So the first thing is things that are repeatable. That means when you have a particular kind of incident, you always respond in a predictable way. Doesn't mean that there's no divergence. So it doesn't mean that, there's not decisions that have to be made, but you know that once those decisions are made, this is the process, okay? So something that's repeatable, that also tends to be the things that humans don't really like. It doesn't lead to a lot of job satisfaction because you're doing the same thing every time. And so look for processes and things that are repeatable and predictable. We kind of mentioned with the repetitive aspect. So, I don't like having to go log into Active Directory on a machine, pull out the tools, disabling this account. It's very repetitive, especially if, 75% of my activities are that way. And so again, it's very much about freeing up your people for important tasks. So look for those repetitive tasks that are really kind of a waste of time for a human to be involved. The other thing is starting simple. Don't start with that really complex use case and 50 different branches of logic and things like that. Start with a really simple thing. Start with, when I have this kind of incident, I gather up this information, I create a ticket. Okay. Don't try to do it all. You just start out simple. The other thing that's really important and why sometimes the frameworks are important is something known. Don't choose that use case that you haven't figured out how to respond to that. Pick the item of, every time this happens, this is our procedure, this is what we follow. If you choose that use case that isn't unknown, you're gonna waste some time learning to use a tool and doing for this really complex use case when you should start simple, and you should pick those items where you know exactly what needs to happen. The last piece, just given this is an OT environment, is understanding your priorities. Safety, all those things are first. Operations are first, okay? Don't make assumptions, especially if you're implementing, let's say you're implementing this for an OT team. Don't make any assumptions. Make sure that, hey, this is what we do. Make sure you understand what are the effects of this. If I go and disable this account, what's going to happen? If I disable a vendor account, if I disable a controller account, really, what is going to happen? That involves typically your OT teams. you need to make sure you have their feedback as part of this, understanding obviously your priority is safety first. And so these are just kind of some of the things I'll tell you just from my personal experience, we get a lot of people who come in and they want to, maybe they're doing a POC or something like that, and like, oh, we want to do this, and we ask them, well, how do you solve that now? And they're like, well, I don't know. We sometimes do this, we sometimes do that. You know, you want to make sure if you're going to be successful, you start with the things you know. You can get to those more advanced use cases, but you're going to end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot and say, well, you know, this platform's too difficult or I can't do it. And it's not always the tools problem. It's you just chose a really difficult problem. And so those are kind of just some of the rules of the road.